Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. So we can see here that I have started another combat, and you might notice that there is a bit of information that wasn't there as of the last video. It says that it is round 1, and if I was to continue playing this game, clicking through the monsters actions and the companions actions, and once everyone had a go and we rolled initiative again, it would start to say round 2 and round 3 and so on. And normally that what round it is doesn't make any difference, because there aren't any sort of time limits or effects that come from how much time has passed in this system. But I have added a special characteristic to one of the combats, which means that the round is important. In my last video that dealt with this project, I had added a special characteristic to one of the fights, the one that happens at the Lotus Pond, and that special characteristic is that a giant mosquito might enter from the back of the battlefield, thus cutting off the player character and any companions' escape. And I think I said at the time that the viewer whose game this is going to be had another combat that they wanted me to add a special characteristic to. That was actually wrong. They actually wanted me to add another special characteristic to the same combat, the Lotus Pond combat. And the special characteristic is that in most of the combats, it's over when you kill all of the enemies. In this one, they want it to be over when you get someone to the other end of the battlefield. Now you might say, well, but you have to kill all the enemies in order to get someone to that end of the battlefield, because you can't have a player character or a companion in an area where the enemies are. So what's the difference there? Well, there is a difference, and the difference is that in this combat, there's a time limit. The round matters. So you might kill all the enemies, but then find that you don't have time to get someone to the far end, and therefore lose. So that's why we have the rounds. They're going to display in all of the combats, but they will have a sort of game significance in this special combat. So what I'd like to do with the rest of the video, as usual, is to show you the code that allows that to happen. So let's start by having a way of keeping track of what round it is. That's really the simplest part of this system. We have a variable round, $ROUND. It starts at 0. You might think it should start at 1 because the first combat round is round 1. Why would it start at 0? Well, because I decided to increment it at the start of the round. And where's the start of the round? Well, the start of the round is when we roll initiative. This is a new bit of code as well, but I'll be talking about that later in the video. So when we roll initiative, because that's a thing that happens at the start of the round, and it happens exactly once per round, it's a good place to keep track of what round it is. So one of the things that I've added there is we set round ++. And that's why we start at 0 rather than 1, because if we started at 1, it would increment it and we'd start on round 2, which is of course not what we want. So having a method of keeping track of what round it is, we also need to tell the player, and we do that in the print distances passage, which is the passage where we display the map of the battle. Essentially, we just do it up the top. We say round and then dollars ROUND and then a couple of line breaks. So it'll say round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, etc. So that bit is fairly simple. We also need to have a way of keeping track of the special conditions of the combat, but we also want to make sure that that's only happening in that particular combat. So in other words, we need a variable that tells us whether we're having this special combat, the one in the lotus pond, or whether we're having one of the normal combats where these conditions don't apply. Now, we did have a special value for ESC_PC, which was to do with the giant mosquito sort of coming in from the back. But when and if that mosquito turns up, ESC_PC is set to a normal value, the same value as in other combats. So that we can't use. We need another variable. And I decided to call that variable simply $lotus pond. So I have a little note here in initialize. So $LOTUSPOND set to 1 if combat is in lotus pond, giving different victory conditions. And how do we know whether to set lotus pond to 1? Well, it's straightforward. We in this sort of test version, this isn't how it will work in the final game, but in this test version, we randomly set up which combat we're using, but then I've sort of overwritten that because I want to test this special combat in particular. I've kind of got this testing only note here that says set Z equal to 9, 9 being the lotus pond encounter. And we're not going to keep, because Z is a temporary variable, we're going to be writing lots of other things into $Z. So that's not where we want to keep it. We say if Z is equal to 9, set lotus pond equal to 1/if. Now, this is a quite inelegant way to do it. Like, if I was doing this from scratch, what I'd probably do is I'd have, instead of Z, instead of a temporary variable, I'd use combat number or battlefield or which encounter or something like that. I'd have a special variable that was what combat we were engaging in. But when I started doing this, I didn't realize that the different combats were going to have different characteristics other than these ones that we set up here. So I've done it in this slightly inelegant way of setting this, and then if that's the specific value, then we set this second variable. We could have done it in using only one variable, but it's easier to sort of leave it as is now. So if Z is equal to 9, we set lotus pond equal to 1. And so we need to have two. There's really three. There's three consequences of having lotus pond equal to 1. First of all, if the round number gets too high, then the players run out of time and therefore they lose. Secondly, killing all the enemies doesn't give you victory. And thirdly, getting the player character or a companion to the far end of the battlefield does give you victory. So there's three things that apply if you're engaging with this lotus pond battle that don't apply when we're dealing with a battle anywhere else. So we have to code each of those, and I think that's the order that we're going to go through them. So first of all, if the round number gets too high, then the game's over. Well, we do that when we increment round. That's the sort of most sensible place to do it. We set round ++, and then we say if the round is equal to 10 and lotus pond is equal to 1, we go to this special passage, which is lotus pond defeat. Lotus pond defeat currently has nothing in it because that's something the viewer whose game this is going to put in. I assume they'll say whatever's appropriate to the plot. The bomb blows up and you're killed or whatever it might be. And if that's not the case, then we go to all of the things that we have already looked at, which is just rolling initiative for everyone. All right, so that's the loss. Next, killing all the enemies doesn't grant you victory. Well, even though it normally does. Well, the relevant passage to that is any enemies left. We go here when an enemy has died, and the reason we go there is to check if there are any enemies left. But if Lotus Pond is equal to 1, we don't want to do that. So what we do is we have an if, and it's if Lotus Pond is equal to 1, we have a little note here that says Lotus Pond's fights victory conditions aren't based on killing all enemies, so no need to do this check. And we just go straight on to the next action. Else, and here, this was the code on this passage. And so we just leave that as is. So we do the normal check, but before you do that, check if Lotus Pond is equal to 1. If Lotus Pond's equal to 1, then it doesn't matter if there are no enemies left. That doesn't end the combat, and therefore we go straight to next action. So that's 2 out of the 3 consequences of having that Lotus Pond flag. The third consequence is that if the player character goes to the end of the battlefield, then we win. Now, I think, where is it? No, sorry, it's in player character move. It's in PC moves. Okay, so once again, we're going to have to, sorry, I don't think I said the whole thing. If the player character goes to the end of the battlefield, the player character's side wins, and if a companion goes to the far end of the battlefield, the player character's side wins. And we have to look at those two things separately because the movement of the player character and the movement of the companions, and in fact the movement of the enemies, are all sort of coded separately. So let's look at PC moves. There's really only one change, and that is this is all we've dealt with this. It's all of the stuff that happens when the player character moves. The basic way that it works is because the player character's position is always counted as 0. What happens within the variables of the game is that the player character doesn't move. It's everyone else moves in the opposite direction. So if the player character moves forward, that actually involves everyone else's position going -1. And if the player character moves backwards, that's everyone else's position moving +1. So how do we check whether, if the player character is always at 0, how do we check whether they're at the end of the battlefield? Well, we have these variables band_low and band_high, which are the numbers that indicate the ends of the battlefield, and they change as the player character moves. So down here, where we used to have include next action, we instead have if Lotus Pond is equal to 1, meaning we're in the Lotus Pond fight, and band_high is equal to 0, meaning that the player character's position is the far end of the battlefield. Then we include Lotus Pond victory, else we include next action. And Lotus Pond victory, like Lotus Pond defeat, is currently completely empty because it's something that the viewer whose game this is going to be is going to fill in for themselves. It's not sort of part of the combat really. It's part of the fiction of the game, I suppose. Or part of the main story of the game, I guess you'd say. I suppose it's all part of the fiction of the game. All right, so finally, let's look at the companion moving. That happens in companion moves. You might say, but James, companion moves, if you've been following the series, you might remember that companion moves is only the companions moving in the default method. It's not to do with them moving based on orders. But they can't, I'm pretty sure that they can't ever get to the far end based on any order. So therefore it's only the default movement that is relevant. Okay. Once again, I may be wrong. There may be some corner case where it can happen. And of course, in that case, hopefully I'll find that out through testing when we test it, and I'll need to add code. But at the moment, I think that's true. So it's only when the player character advances, because if they retreat, well, they're going backwards. They're obviously not going to end up at the far end of the battlefield by going backwards. So all we do is look at the circumstance in which they successfully advance, and therefore we set com ini underscore who 3 plus plus, and we say if lotus pond is equal to 1 and com ini underscore who 3 equals band high, then we include lotus pond victory. Well, what does that mean? Well, lotus pond, we've already talked about that. It's the flag that tells us, i.e. it's a variable that is set to 1 to indicate that this is the special fight. This is the one in the lotus pond. Com is an array that is to do with companions. And com something 3 is location. And ini underscore who stands for who has initiative. And it's a number that says who's acting, as the name would suggest. And if we're on this passage, then the character that's acting is a companion. So it's com, the companion that's acting 3. If that equals band underscore high, in other words, if they've moved to the far end of the battlefield, then we win. We go to lotus pond victory. And that takes care of all of the consequences of having that. We've looked at time running out, which is over here. We've looked at displaying it. I guess that's not a consequence of it, but displaying it. We've looked at killing all the enemies doesn't grant victory in this special case. And then we looked at the player character moving there gives you victory, and the companion moving there gives you victory. Now, there is one special consequence which is to do with the charge move, where you might... because the charge move involves finding an enemy and moving towards them. And normally that makes sense, because if there aren't any enemies, the combat ends straight away. But what if you have the charge move and there aren't any enemies left, which that can happen in this particular case, because in this particular case, this special combat, killing all the enemies doesn't end the combat. Well, in that case, you could end in an infinite loop. Or either an infinite loop or an error. I haven't looked at the code to see, but it wouldn't do what it's meant to do. So therefore, I'm going to have to fix the charge command to make sure that if there aren't any enemies left, the companion just charges forward, which is probably the most reasonable interpretation of that. But that is something I will do next time. For now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.